Now that's an interesting thing. Um, you know, a lot of digital artists that I follow, especially who do stuff in Photoshop with really incredible kind of traditional looks to them. I feel like a lot of them, they're doing the paintings and then they're like manually going back in and adding texture and whatnot, and like
Yeah,
adding like little artifacts that make it look traditional. Which at that point, it feels like it's actually more work. Um,
It
and
is.
yeah,
it
and
is.
I wonder is there a certain point, and admittedly, this is coming from like a strictly digital guy, but is there a point that you get to where it's like, okay, at this point, I might as well just paint on canvas? Where is that line?
I think about that all of the time, because I don't know. It's just something about a personal preference where I mean, there's certain things that should look really digital, and it should look like, okay, I can tell that was kind of rendered on a computer. But some of the stuff that like I personally do, I just kind of like that look more, a little bit better. But I like the convenience of doing it on a Cintiq or just in Photoshop. Period. So I think the doing it and making it look traditional is kind of like an easier. It's like a marrying of the two. So it's easier for me to like paint it with Photoshop, but then get it to look like I painted, on canvas.
Traditionally. And
Yeah,
I
and
think it
it's
also gets a lot easier with time, just, with technological advances. The software is getting better and making it a lot easier to simulate traditional stuff. It's easier to blend. It's easier to get some of those subtle nuances that you would
It's
have with
fast.
traditional.
Like I
Well,
could paint an oil painting and it'd take me a week or maybe more, or I could do it in Photoshop and make it kind of look like one, and I could do it in a few days.
As far as there being the only difference I've found between working digitally and working traditionally is that there's no brushes to clean. Other than that, I'd say you're going to invest about the same amount of time either way,
Yeah. I agree
yeah.
so much.
because you're gonna paint it, you're gonna blend, you're gonna do whatever you got to do in Photoshop to get your painting the way you want it to be, but sometimes I find it's faster to just paint it traditionally because I'm not gonna zoom in to like here and paint an eye.
I
I'm
would.
gonna paint it from here with a small brush and get it done. Whereas if I'm gonna do it digitally, I know I'm making the illustration big for print, but the head is almost life size in the illustration in the digital drawing, so I could zoom in like this close and just render the hell out of every little pore or any little piece of the illustration rather than just pulling out and saying, okay, what's important? And once I do that, it takes about the same amount of time. Like Torin, you're saying if you were to paint a portrait in traditionally, it would take you a week, but if you were to do it in Photoshop, it would take a few days. So what? You're plus or minus 3 days
Yeah, something like that.
ballpark. Yeah. So I mean, ultimately, that just comes down to speed. Like I know guys that can knock out a finished portrait in an afternoon.
Yeah,
And anything else that they do is just little details.
yeah,
But it's all the same thing. It takes around about the same amount of time to do a digital painting as it does to do a traditional. There's just more thought on the front end for traditional painting, where you have to know what your colors are going to be, what your values are going to be from the start, and then paint it, rather than in Photoshop or digital, you could go through the whole thing in gray tone and then on an overlay
right.
like drop in color and be done. And nobody's going to question it. It's or you could spend time laboring over it, doing blobs and for an hour until all of a sudden you see something you like. And I've had really famous concept art friends of mine say, Yeah, I have no idea what I'm doing half the time.
Yeah.
Like,
This is very common.
Trial and error.
but they make it work in the end, and you're like, what the hell, man? You had no idea, and you just pulled that out your ass. But they're not going to say that in their Gumroads video.
Right.
Of course.
We keep that on the low. But anyway, that's my piece, and I'm going to go back to mute before I say something.
No. It's interesting because that was like my exact progression. Where when I started digital, I didn't have the confidence to kind of just say, okay, these are the colors I'm going with. These are values I'm going with. You know, I taught myself kind of on the fly, and it didn't look great. But you know, so when I was starting off, I did a lot of stuff. Let's see if I can pull it up. Hold, please, for directory assistance.
I think it's worth mentioning too that you don't have to choose traditional art or digital art. You can do both. And Eric's a good example of that, where it's pretty much indistinguishable between a digital painting and an oil painting. I think that's pretty cool because a lot of people think that you have to do one or the other, and it's a decision you have to make.
That's amazing to be able to. You know, one of the things that I admire most about you, Eric, is that you know we were looking through your portfolio yesterday, and we should do that again. Anyway, for the meantime, you know, we're scrolling through, and you've got a pretty even mix of traditional and digital, and I think that like the greatest testament to your ability is that like I had to really try to figure out which was which.
Yeah.
And it it takes a certain level of mastery, and it's not digital skill, it's just painting skill. And that you have taken your experience as a traditional fine artist and a painter, and you apply the same workflow and the same theory and things like that. That the two mediums or media or whatever, even though they're so different, they appear so similar.